For 50 years, a small town lived with the lie that a little girl's disappearance was just a tragedy without answers. The man many called a hero, Judge William Hayes, was hiding a truth too dark to face. But when a torn stuffed bear kept reappearing on Michael Turner's porch, his dog Ranger led him straight to the secret the town had buried. And just wait until you hear how this quiet veteran uncovered the truth and why justice finally caught up after half a century of silence.
Michael Turner had built his life around simple rhythms. After retiring from the fire department, he had moved back to his childhood town in the Midwest, choosing a weathered but sturdy house with a wide porch where he could sit with a mug of coffee and watch the seasons change. It wasn't excitement he wanted anymore. It was quiet, something steady after decades of rushing into flames and chaos. Every morning began the same way. He brewed strong black coffee, stepped outside with Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, and listened to the stillness of the small town waking up. On this particular morning in late autumn, the air was sharp, carrying the smell of dry leaves and wood smoke. Michael expected nothing unusual, just another day rolling into the next. But when he opened the door, his steps halted. There, directly on the welcome mat, sat a small stuffed bear. Its fur was faded, one ear frayed to threads. A single button eye hung loosely by a stitch, swaying slightly in the breeze. It looked old, older than anything a child would be playing with now. For a moment, Michael just stared, puzzled. He picked it up carefully. The fabric felt damp from the morning dew, and when he turned it over, he noticed a tear down its side where some of the stuffing poked out. He frowned, glancing across the street. Maybe it had blown in from a neighbor's yard. Kids sometimes left toys outside. That had to be it. Michael set the bear on the porch railing, planning to toss it in the trash later. By midday, he'd forgotten about it. The next morning, however, when he opened the door again, the sight made his stomach tighten. The bear was back. Same place, same angle, as if it had been deliberately placed there. This time, Michael threw it into the garbage bin at the end of the driveway, shaking his head at the strangeness of it all. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't want to sound like he was fussing over nothing. But the unease clung to him. Ranger, normally calm and even-tempered, seemed to sense more than Michael did. When the dog spotted the toy, his hackles rose. He circled it, sniffed hard, and let out a low growl that lingered in his throat. Michael tried to brush it off, telling Ranger it was just a toy. But the dog didn't relax. His stare stayed locked on it, as though he could smell something his owner couldn't. Michael laughed softly, more to steady himself than anything else. "What, you think it's haunted?" he muttered. But the words fell flat against the still air. The following day, when he stepped outside, Michael froze completely. There it was again. The same stuffed bear, right back on the porch, resting neatly against the mat, despite the fact that he tossed it away with his own hands. Michael stood there for a long moment, coffee cooling in his cup, while Ranger's growls deepened. The dog edged closer, sniffing at the toy, then looked back at Michael with a sharp, uneasy whine. It was no longer something he could shrug off. The ordinary explanation, kids, wind, coincidence, crumbled in his mind. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. And in that moment, the quiet comfort of Michael's daily life shifted. The bear, small and harmless in appearance, carried with it a weight that unsettled him to his core. What began as a curiosity was quickly turning into something else. Real intrigue. By the fourth morning, Michael knew what he would see before he even opened the door. The stuffed bear was waiting for him again, this time with Ranger already pawing at it. The big shepherd's nails scraped against the porch boards as he whined. Not the playful whimper Michael knew, but a restless, uneasy sound that came from deep inside his chest. Then Ranger did something unusual. He clamped his teeth gently around the bear, trotted down the steps, and pulled at Michael's pant leg, urging him to follow. Michael sighed, set down his coffee, and let the dog lead him across the yard. Ranger didn't stop until they reached the far corner of the property, where the fence leaned against a thicket of brush. Beyond it lay the old Miller place. The Miller property had been empty for as long as Michael could remember. The house still stood, but barely, its roof sagging, windows clouded with grime, vines crawling up the sides. No one went there anymore. The Millers had left suddenly decades ago, and the reason was something every local knew but no one liked to speak of. Their young daughter had vanished in the mid-1970s. Some said she ran away. Others whispered darker things, muttering about secrets covered up to protect certain people in town. But no one ever dared to say anything certain. Michael had been a teenager back then, old enough to remember the hushed conversations, but too young to understand them fully. Even now, the memory sent a cold edge through him. Ranger barked sharply, snapping Michael back. The dog was digging furiously at the base of the fence, sending up clumps of dirt. His movements were wild, as if he had caught a scent too strong to ignore. Then, just as suddenly, Ranger stopped, ran back to the porch, and nosed the stuffed bear where it still lay. He looked up at Michael with sharp, expectant eyes, as if demanding that his owner understand. Michael's chest tightened. The bear wasn't just wandering into his yard. It wasn't random. It was pointing somewhere, pointing back to that house and the secrets that had been left to rot with it. That night, sleep refused to come. He sat in his kitchen long after midnight, the torn bear in front of him on the table. The lamp cast a circle of warm light over the worn fabric, making it look almost alive. For hours, Michael stared at it, turning it over in his hands, trying to decide if he was letting his imagination run away from him. Then he noticed the seam. It wasn't just torn, it had been split deliberately, as if someone had hidden something inside. Carefully, with calloused fingers, he pulled the fabric apart. Something thin and fragile was tucked deep within. He eased it free, holding it under the light. It wasn't stuffing. It was a scrap of cloth. Delicate, patterned with faint traces of color, though time had dulled it nearly gray. The edges were frayed, but it was clearly a piece of a dress, a child's dress. Michael's breath caught. His hands trembled slightly as he set it down on the table. He didn't need anyone to explain it to him. He knew what he was looking at. The shock landed like a blow to the chest, knocking the air out of him. The bear wasn't just a forgotten toy. It was a message from the past, one that had waited 50 years to be found.
The next morning, Michael didn't even bother with his coffee. The moment he opened the door, Ranger was waiting, alert and restless, ears pricked as if he had been anticipating his owner's steps. The dog gave a sharp bark and sprinted toward the old fence without hesitation. Michael followed, boots crunching over frosted grass, a knot forming in his chest. He climbed the leaning boards and dropped into the Miller yard for the first time in years. The place was worse than he remembered. Windows sagged inward, shutters hung askew, and weeds had swallowed what was once a tidy garden. The house seemed to lean under the weight of time, as if trying to bury its own secrets. Ranger ran straight for a sprawling oak that towered near the edge of the property. Its gnarled roots twisted above the ground like knotted fingers. The dog began clawing at the dirt with desperate energy, kicking up soil in sharp bursts. His growls came low, insistent, not of aggression but of urgency. Michael dropped to his knees beside him and began pulling away clumps of earth with his hands. The soil was damp and heavy, clinging to his skin. After several minutes of digging, his fingers struck something solid. Metal. He froze, his pulse quickening, then brushed away more dirt until a small box revealed itself. Rust had eaten through much of its surface, and the hinges were brittle, but it was unmistakably man-made. With effort, Michael pried it free from the root's grip and set it down. His hands trembled as he forced the lid open. The hinges groaned, and a faint smell of damp age escaped. Inside, time itself seemed preserved. The first thing he saw was a bundle of photographs, their edges curled and yellowed.
Faces stared up at him in fading tones, images of the Miller family smiling in front of the very house that now stood in ruin. One photograph in particular caught his breath. The little girl, no more than 8 or 9, clutching the same stuffed bear that had appeared on his porch. Her smile was bright, innocent, unknowing. Beside the photographs lay a small shoe, cracked with age, its leather stiff. Michael lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of what it symbolized. He set it down, his throat tight. Beneath these relics were folded sheets of paper, fragile but still legible. He unfolded the first one slowly, bracing himself. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, almost frantic. The words spilled across the page in a voice that seemed to echo straight from the past. Fragments of fear, desperate pleas, and names written with shaky conviction. As Michael read further, his stomach turned. The notes described how the girl had trusted someone she knew, someone who was respected in town. They told of fear that grew into silence, and silence that grew into disappearance. The writer, whether it was the girl herself or someone close to her, had tried to record the truth. The words painted a portrait not of accident or mystery, but of betrayal. Michael gripped the paper so tightly his knuckles whitened. His shock curdled into anger. For 50 years, the town had carried the story of the missing girl like a shadow, something people whispered about but never dared to confront. Neighbors had moved on, families had built new lives, all under the comfort of believing it was a mystery without answer. But here, in his hands, lay proof that it hadn't been unsolvable at all. It had been buried, hidden beneath roots and dirt, protected by silence. The stuffed bear hadn't returned to his porch by chance. It was a messenger, dragging the truth back into the light. Michael stood in the overgrown yard, clutching the weathered notes, his jaw set.
Michael didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with the box open in front of him, staring at the fragile pieces of the past until dawn bled into the horizon. Ranger lay at his feet, restless but loyal, occasionally lifting his head as if sensing the storm in his owner's chest. By morning, Michael knew what he had to do. He drove straight to the sheriff's office, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. Sheriff Daniel Hayes had been his friend since high school, a man he trusted, someone who had worn the badge with quiet dignity for over 20 years. If anyone could handle the truth, it was him. When Michael entered, Daniel looked up from his desk, surprised by his friend's grim expression. "Mike, you look like you've seen a ghost." Michael didn't waste words. He set the rusted box down on the desk, the lid already loose, and pushed it toward him. "Read," he said simply. The sheriff frowned, confused, but obeyed. He lifted the photographs first, his brow furrowing, then unfolded the brittle papers. The office grew painfully quiet as his eyes moved across the frantic handwriting. His hands began to shake. The color drained from his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. This name." Michael leaned forward. "You know who it is." Daniel's jaw tightened. He set the papers down, then shoved his chair back and stood, pacing the room like a man suddenly trapped. His hands went to his head, as if trying to block out what he'd just read. "It's my father." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. His father, the late Judge William Hayes, had been one of the most respected men in the county. He had been praised in newspapers, spoken of with reverence at community gatherings, remembered as a man of honor and principle. And yet here, written in desperate, uneven script, was a voice pointing directly at him. Daniel's composure cracked, his face twisted, his voice rising with rage. Rage not at Michael, but at the unbearable truth forcing its way into daylight. "I heard things when I was a boy," he admitted, words spilling out as if he'd been holding them back for decades. Whispers, rumors in schoolyards. "I thought they were lies, cruel jokes. I buried them, Mike. I had to. He was my father." He slammed his fist against the desk, then slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "And now this proves it." Michael felt the heat of fury burn in his chest. 50 years. 50 years of silence while the memory of a child had been reduced to nothing more than a story parents told in hushed tones. A whole community had looked the other way, honoring a man who had never deserved it. And yet here, Ranger, who lay beside him with ears pricked and eyes sharp, the dog's steady presence grounding him. Michael's voice was steady, though his insides churned. No more silence, Dan. Not for your father, not for anyone. This has to come out. The sheriff lifted his head, eyes red but resolute. The storm inside him hadn't passed, but beneath it was something new, a grim determination. You're right, he said. For her, for the Miller family, for this town, it's time. And in that moment, the weight shifted. Anger still smoldered, but it sharpened into resolve. What had been buried under roots and silence would finally be brought into the light. The truth, at last, was ready to be told.
By mid-morning, unmarked sedans rolled quietly into town and parked behind the sheriff's office. State investigators shook Daniel Hayes's hand and listened without interruption as he laid out what Michael had discovered, where the box had been found, what it contained, and why he was recusing himself from any decisions. They sealed the photographs and notes in evidence bags with careful motions, speaking in even tones that suggested experience with fragile histories. No grand statements, no rush to the cameras, just measured steps meant to protect the truth. Calls were made across time zones. The Miller family, now scattered from Arizona to Maine, answered phones with the guarded patience of people who had lived half a century with an unfinished sentence in their lives. They listened, asked the kinds of questions that come from decades of not knowing, then fell quiet when the investigators explained how the items would be authenticated and how a formal report would be shared with them first. There were long pauses on those calls, heavy, breath-filled spaces where you could almost hear the weight easing, if only a little. News moved through the town the way it always did. One neighbor's knock, a hushed conversation at the hardware store, a text message sent to the wrong group chat, and then to everyone. By afternoon, a cluster of residents stood at the edge of the Miller property, keeping a respectful distance as yellow leaves drifted down from the big oak. No one tried to step past the tape. They didn't need to see more to understand. Sometimes a town becomes loud in its silence. This was one of those times. Michael kept to his porch. He'd done his part, and the rest belonged to process and patience. Ranger lay at his feet, finally still, the dog's chest rising and falling in long, even breaths. On the railing, the stuffed bear rested in the slope of fading sunlight, its worn fur catching the gold of early evening. The toy no longer carried that uncanny chill. It looked like what it always had been, a small, loved thing that had outlived the hands that once held it. Daniel drove over just before dusk. He didn't come in uniform. He took the porch steps slowly and sat in the chair opposite Michael, elbows on his knees, head bowed for a moment before he could speak. When he did, his voice was steady. "They're handling it right," he said, carefully. "The family is going to get everything first, the photos, the notes, the full account. They deserve that." Michael nodded. "They do." Daniel looked at Ranger and gave a tired smile. "Your partner there, he didn't let it go." "He wouldn't," Michael said, and it came out with more feeling than he expected. Sometimes a good dog decides the truth for you. They sat without talking for a while as the last light thinned along the street. Here and there, porch lamps blinked on. The sound of a screen door, of kids riding bikes, of a freight train far off. Ordinary noises that felt new again now that the secrecy was breaking apart. Finally, Daniel stood. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not for finding a box, not for forcing an investigation, for refusing to look away when it would have been easier." He paused, then added, "The family asked to keep the bear, if that's okay." Michael glanced at the toy, then at Ranger. The dog's ears twitched, but he stayed relaxed. "It belongs to them," Michael said. "Always did." After Daniel left, the evening slid toward night in a gentle hush. A couple from down the block taped a small bouquet to the Miller fence and walked away hand in hand. Someone placed a battery candle near the oak and left a note no one read aloud. The local paper posted a short update asking for sensitivity and patience. For the first time in years, the town wasn't treating the story as a ghost tale. It was treating it as history, painful, real, and deserving of care. Inside, Michael washed 2 coffee mugs he hadn't used and set them to dry. When he came back out, Ranger thumped his tail once and rolled onto his side, a deep dog sigh escaping like a knot loosening. Michael reached down and ran a hand over the thick fur behind his ears, feeling the steady warmth of the animal who had pulled him across a boundary he wouldn't have crossed alone. He lifted the bear from the railing and turned it in his hands one last time. The loose button eye, the frayed ear, the softened seams, the marks of time were all there, but now they told a different story. Not one of fear, but of persistence, of a voice that found a way. When Daniel returned later with a labeled evidence bag and a careful promise, just for transport to the family, not to be filed away, Michael let the bear go without a second thought. He watched the car disappear down the street and felt no tug of doubt. The messenger had delivered its message. Across town, phones rang again. A son in Arizona answered, wept quietly, and said he would fly in for the meeting. A sister in Maine asked if there might be a place, a tree, a marker, where she could leave a ribbon and a prayer of thanks for a town that had finally listened. The investigators agreed to help with arrangements once their work wrapped. On the porch, Michael leaned back and let the night settle around him. He thought of the years he'd spent running toward emergencies, the way habit teaches you to move first and feel later. This time, he'd had to do both at once, to move with care and feel every inch of it. He wasn't proud in the showy way of public praise. He was proud in the quiet way of someone who had chosen the harder road and stayed on it. The street lamps hummed. A breeze strolled through the trees, and the oak across the fence answered with a soft shake of leaves. Somewhere a screen door clicked shut. Ordinary life returning by degrees. Ranger lifted his head and placed it on Michael's knee, a simple gesture that said more than words could. The dog had done more than nose at a toy or bark at a fence. He had carried a line through the past and set it in Michael's hands, then stood watch until the right people picked it up. In his steady gaze, Michael felt the echo of a promise kept. As messages pinged and the town found a new rhythm around the news, Michael exhaled, long and even. The secret was out. Justice, slow, imperfect, but real, had stepped from shade into light. The Miller family would receive answers, not rumors. The town had chosen truth, and truth had chosen not to let go. Ranger's breathing slowed. His tail tapped once, then went still. Michael reached down and let his palm rest on the dog's shoulder, feeling the calm pass between them like a tide going out. And for the first time in days, he felt it, clean and complete, relief. The porch was quiet, the mat was empty, morning would come, and there would be no toy waiting on the step.